All right, we are live. Thank you everybody for tuning into the Starboard Portal, our new content platform for US sailing. Today we have Coach Reed Maltbie kicking off our very first live webinar. And today Reed is going to be talking about the power of language in skills-based learning. So here's Reed, and he's going to go ahead and kick off his presentation now.
Welcome everybody to the webinar. Excited to be here with you. I know it's we're finding a new normal. But I'm glad that I'm still able to be connected with you all and serve the sailing community, my favorite family. So today we're going to talk about why words matter, the power of language in skill-based learning. I'm going to walk you through what skill-based learning is, why it's important, how we apply it, and then really dig into the language around teaching during skill-based learning so we can set up the proper learning environment. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them there in the YouTube comments section. We'll be monitoring those questions. I can also give you my contact information so you can ask questions later on as well. I'm here for you during this time. Let's jump right in. Why words matter, the power of language in skill-based learning. There we go. So first off, what is skill-based learning? Well, skill-based learning is, if you think about a classroom, typically teachers do two types of learning. They do knowledge-based learning or skill-based learning. Knowledge-based learning is just where they're constantly, where they're teaching to the students, giving them information. But teachers have gotten to the point where they start doing things like projects and group learning, and they walk children through opportunities to actually go through the skill-based learning process, which is using skills that they already have. So they're building on skills that they already have and trying to develop deeper skills or connect multiple strings of skills. So think about learning one skill in a vacuum, and now you apply that skill into a project where you're using multiple skills and you're building upon that. The beauty of skill-based learning is that it teaches athletes or even students, it encourages this bravery to try new things. When you put children into a situation where they're learning through using the skills they have this courage to try new skills, to look at how they apply those skills differently than they usually have. The other thing that it does is it dares them to explore unknown waters. So when you put children have a group of skills, they're building on those skills, there's the opportunity to try completely different directions with those skills, things we don't even know. Some of my greatest moments in coaching were when my athletes applied something that I'd never even seen before. And I'd ask them, why'd you do that? And they said, well, it looked like the right thing to do, coach, and blah, blah, blah. And it was a learning experience for me as a coach to realize that they were going to find new waters. They were explorers. Now, to compare skill-based learning to knowledge-based learning, oh, I forgot. When we do this, I have a quote. I love doing quotes at the end of everything just to sort of tie everything up. This is all about, skill-based learning is all about the courage to fail, the honesty to admit it, and the fortitude to fix it. Let them use those, grow those skills through making mistakes, being honest about what happened so they can sort of debrief themselves and then find ways to fix it. So skill-based learning compared to knowledge-based learning. Learning is more of a knowledge transfer. It's a teaching method. It's pouring in. We picture ourselves as these lecturers standing at the front of the room, or as the coaches on the dock, and we're pouring knowledge into our sailors. Skill-based learning takes it to the next level. It's about drawing knowledge out, or it's about drawing out the ability to learn. So it's about creating knowledge in athletes, and it's about allowing them to learn. So there's a big difference between in this process. And so I always think of skill-based learning as that educare model. The root word for educate is educare, which is to draw forth. We have to give them knowledge. There are things we must teach them, but at some point we want to release them to the sailing experience and help them start to draw out their own ability to create new skills and new knowledge within the realm. So I saw a quote one time that sort of sums it up really well, and I just adapted it to this. When the boat is moving, learning is happening. We're not teaching, they're learning. When the boat is docked, that's when we might do knowledge-based teaching. So when the boat is docked, teaching happens. Why is skill-based learning important in sailing for you all? It's an extremely technical sport, but you're very unique. You have the opportunity to allow sailors to grow their own skill sets and build upon them, because you string together so many different small skills that are happening at once, and it's a dynamic environment that's constantly changing. So you have a unique opportunity to create these adaptive, analytical, independent thinkers, because when they're on the water, it could be anywhere between several minutes to 20 minutes. You can actually have a conversation with them. When we were in Utah recently with the College Sailing Association or the College Sailing Group, we asked the looks like I bounced out there, huh?
There we go. I was gonna say we lost you for a sec, but you are coming through loud and clear again, Reed.
Okay.
Perfect. Was it my end?
I think so. I'm not entirely sure though.
Sorry.
Well, I apologize. I'm up to Gigablast. I did that right at the beginning of our order to stay home, but I do have professional gamers in the house and my teenagers, so I've paused all devices, but this is what we do. We adapt, right? So I think I was at independence and interdependence. The beauty of skill-based learning in the classroom, when you put children together in groups and they work on projects and they expand their skill knowledge or their skill abilities, is that they start to work together. So they learn to learn these skills independently, but then they learn how to collaborate, how to work with others, how to utilize other skills that they don't have. And this is vital to sailing because typically you end up in a team environment, especially if you're in the same boat, all of them in the same boat. So this is a really great opportunity for us to build that expertise so they are independent, but they're also interdependent. So they learn to work together. The other side of it is this technical and tactical mixing. Sailing is one of those sports where you need to be extremely tactical. You need to have knowledge and context within the sport, where to apply certain skills, how to apply those skills when they matter the most. And it's also an extremely technical sport. So the ability to get them in these positions where they're doing skill-based learning, it means you're building both the technical and tactical at the same time. To liken it to the sport I coach, soccer, I could put my kids in lines and have them dribble around cones. That's technical skill development, but it has no tactical relevance to the game because they'll never in a game dribble around a cone. So I have to find those opportunities to put them in projects or in games where they're actually applying the technical skills in a tactical situation. So they have that intelligence, that game intelligence or game awareness. And the final piece of the puzzle here is that it's automatic and analytical. When you do skill-based learning, what you're doing is you're creating sort of an automaticity in your athletes because they're learning the skills in context and they're learning to layer skills. What happens is they start to become a little bit more automatic. You start to see those flow experiences where they do things and you ask them and they say, I don't know, that's how I did it. When I first started to learn to sail just a few months ago back in Miami, by the end of the session, there were some things that already I was doing just because it was taught to me so well and the right language was used that it became almost automatic how I was moving about the boat. On the flip side is there's an analytical piece. Because we're freeing up brain activity, because we're creating automaticity, it allows our athletes to be more analytical in the environment and start to read the room better and start to plan ahead. So when skills become expertise, athletes feel competent, confident, connected, and in control. This is what's important. They feel confident as they layer skills and they start to feel that expertise, competency starts to build. That builds all kinds of opportunities. They become more confident. They'll take more risks. They believe in themselves. They believe in their teammates. They're connected because of that interdependence. They're really connecting with their teammates, and there's that interconnected trust. And finally, they feel in control of their environment. When you put them in situations where they're developing their skills organically, rather than us just teaching them in a vacuum, they feel control. And athletes, anybody that has that feeling of control, that's a big key for intrinsic motivation. It's also a big key for triggering learning behaviors. So how do you apply it? Use games. Put them in opportunities where they have games, mini races, contests on the boats, contests on the docks, races to tie knots, whatever you have at your disposal to create these game situations, especially if they're collaborative games where they're working together in teams. Free play. It was much easier for soccer, but I would show up and my athletes knew that before I got there, they could be playing. I didn't want them hanging around or laying on the ground or anything like that. I wanted them out playing and enjoying themselves because I typically, by the end of my career, when I got enough knowledge, I'd walk up and let them play for 15 or 20 minutes. And then I'd begin the practice off of what I saw in the free play. One of the best coaching clinics I ever saw was a world-renowned skill acquisition expert. Marco Solomon was in Ontario, Canada. He's in Sweden working the Swedish FA. He was in Ontario, Canada doing a session, and he had no session plan. He put the athletes on the field, he let them start free playing, and then he taught the session based on what he saw and kept them playing, but started to layer in learning. Gutsy to do it, but it was an extremely important moment because it made me realize how valuable free play is for our athletes. Give them projects. Again, team projects are the things they can do in groups where they're collaborating, they're learning the technical skills they need to be great sailors, but they're building other skills onto those. And finally, peer assisted learning. If you have certain sailors that are at one level and you have other sailors that aren't quite there, to get them in that zone of proximal development, look to take the sailors who have maybe automatized that skill already and put them with those that are still struggling, because they'll help them. And when you teach once, you learn twice. So in other words, these sailors that already know it, as they're teaching the other sailors, they're getting better at the skill. And for some reason, we all do it. We learn so much better from our peers. So when you can have peers demonstrate it or peers assist with the learning, you're creating that skill-based environment for both of them. We call it playing at sports for a reason. And so that we should always find those opportunities to put them in play-based situations, game-based situations, project play situations. So we create those little mini play competitions for them so that they can build those skills. It's okay to teach skills in a vacuum. Certain safety skills, especially on the boat, need to be taught in a vacuum. But look for those opportunities where you can drive context by putting them into some kind of play situation where they see where it would apply when they're out on the water. So let's jump into the real bulk here. Why words matter when we start talking about skill-based learning. And if, for reference, Nick Winkelman is one of the world's leading experts in skill acquisition when it comes to words and cueing. So I highly recommend checking out Nick Winkelman's work. I believe he's with the Irish FA right now, or the Irish RFU. He's a phenomenal speaker. He's a phenomenal writer, and he really gets it. So I'll lean a lot on his work. USOPC also has resources. They all have worked with Nick Winkelman, so I would check in with them as well. So when you speak less, explore more. What I mean by that is try to give as few instructions as possible and then get them exploring immediately. It should be about, when you look at Nick Winkelman's models, when we did it in soccer, it's 30 seconds of describing a quick demo, and then the bulk of the time is spent letting them try the skills in context, and then maybe 30 seconds of debrief. So speak less, explore more. They need to be playing to learn. Standing and watching or listening to us, they're not learning, but cueing from us and then trying it themselves, they will learn. Secondly, focus on one phrase at a time. This was a really difficult one for me as a coach. I wanted to teach so much in every moment that I had to realize that each practice, each game was just one phrase. Maybe it's play feet today. Maybe it's get wide. Maybe it's eyes up. Whatever it was, we had to start giving them phrases. Obviously, my son's bird loves this webinar. He's giving all kinds of feedback. we had to give just one phrase because it's much easier for them to acquire those skills and build on those skills if we're grooving that one phrase. Give feedback intermittently. You don't have to give feedback after every single event. You could wait a few. You could demonstrate it, let them try it, let them debrief themselves, go back to demonstrate whatever you want to do with it. But you don't have to give feedback after every single attempt because they're thinking on their own. You want them to be independent. You want them to be self-evaluative. When you speak, your goal is to create the most learning with the fewest words. Nick Winkelman will say the same thing. Teach more by saying less. Your goal as a sailing coach is to use as few words as possible, a lot less than I'm using today, to convey learning opportunities to them. How you speak also matters. So now we understand when we should be talking, but how should we speak to our athletes? Shorten it, specify it, and show it. I already talked about this model a little bit. Say as little as possible. Get really to the heart of it. Don't bury the lead. Go right in, tell them this is what I'm teaching you. This is why it's important. And this is where it could apply in sailing. Show it, demonstrate it to them. It's very important that if they hear what you're talking about, they get to see it done. if you want to use peer-assisted learning, which is extremely valuable, take one of your sailors who's competent at that skill and have them demonstrate it. When I got to be in my 40s and would have those days where my back was cranky and didn't want to work, I was always looking for my demo kings and queens so they could show everybody for me rather than me having to demo it. And again, if they see a peer doing it, it's so much more powerful, because especially for us young, extremely skilled sailors, when I was, well, I say young because when I was 18, 19, I could do the skills really well. When I was 40, I struggled with it. But for us extremely skilled sailors, what happens is if you demonstrate it, they think, oh, well, he or she's an expert. I could never be that good. Of course, it looks easy for her. But if you have a fellow student or a young sailor demonstrate it, they go, wow, if Mikey could do it, this is a skill I can learn. Secondly, use what they already know. This is so important. Knowledge linking. If they already have a certain skill that applies to this particular one, use that. Leverage what is already grooved in their neural connections in their brains to teach them something new. Don't try to teach them something new out of vacuum if they already have a certain skill. If they already know one portion of that larger skill set, then make sure they understand where that applies. So always use previous or common knowledge to teach something new to people. And finally, your last words to them as you're teaching that skill should be an external cue. And I'm going to get to what an external cue is in a minute, but just know it must be an external cue, something outside of their body, so that it will help them start to groove the skill. Language leads the learning. Every time we speak to our athletes, every time they're speaking to themselves and each other, learning is happening. But if we remain intentional in our language, that's going to lead to intentional learning. They'll stop learning bad habits. They'll stop learning the wrong way to do things, or they'll stop learning how to get down on themselves. They'll start to intentionally learn what they need to learn to be successful. Why words matter? What you speak also matters. So we've talked about how you speak, when you speak, what you speak matters too. Visualization is vital. When you're describing a skill to them, try to use visualization. It's been proven and researched time and again that if you can create a visual image in their brains, it grooves the muscles better. They've actually done research on athletes who've done Jean-Claude Killy, world famous ski racer. They put electrodes on his legs. They ran him through extremely vivid imagery and talked him through visualization, and the electrodes were actually recognizing movement in the muscles, innervation in the muscles. Not the muscles were moving a lot, but that you could see the muscles were ready. And so the brain is actually speaking to the body, even when we're not moving, but we're visualizing. So when you teach a skill, give them really good visualization. This was done with me when we were out on the water in Miami, and I was told, close your eyes and picture this and smell this and see this. And man, that visualization was so powerful to actually feel the sail fill with air and hear that pop. That was very powerful for me. Analogies are awesome. With that, like I said in the last one, connecting to something they know, analogies are so great with athletes. It's like doing this. For instance, when we were in Colorado with the USOPC, they were talking about hip angles and keeping our sailors with level hips and teaching people how to level their hips. And it was the best. My wife's in yoga, and the other day I was telling her this, and she loved that example because she's always cueing with visuals and analogies. To keep the hips level, think of the hips like a bucket, and they're filled with water. If you tip the hips too far forward, water spills out. If you tip the hips too far backward, water spills out. And so now you're getting your athletes to create that level hip. Brilliant. I thought that was a great analogy. Look for those opportunities to use analogies. The one used with me on the water was when I was holding the rudder, to hold it like a microphone. Again, I'm not a sailor, so if I use the wrong term, I apologize. To hold it like a microphone, and that kept it up here rather than letting it drop here. It kept me up here, and it kept me in a really powerful position so that I could control the boat. I love that microphone analogy. Finally, create connections. We tend to teach with a common connection in mind. As teachers in the classroom, we've got a book to get through. We've got learning objectives. We've got an annual plan. And so we always teach trying to connect the dots to next week and the week after and when the state test comes. As coaches, we forget about those connections, and we sometimes get caught up in teaching in a vacuum. I teach one thing one week, and then the next practice, I teach something different. And there was never a connection between them. What I never realized is how important it is to connect the dots to the bigger picture for your athletes. So when you're teaching skills, try to connect them progressively, either in a particular session or from session to session, so that they're putting all the skills together and it becomes the sailing process for them. Think about that progress, that progression. Also create the connections to the bigger picture when you're teaching. Again, if you're going to put them in skills-based, it's okay to teach them the skill in the vacuum, skill acquisition, but get them in projects where they can see it in the bigger picture. I always ended my training sessions with a game. The idea was, as I started with the skill in the vacuum, I built it into small-sided games or with some pressure or added constraints like time, space, or defenders. And then I added a little bit more space and more constraints or more opportunity to expand the skill. And I always finished with a game because I wanted them to see where it would apply in the larger game of soccer. They would learn the skill and now they know where to apply the skill, that connection. We are more than skill builders. We're also architects of the brain. When you speak to your athletes, creating those connections, using those analogies, creating vivid imagery, you're architecting the brain. You're building pathways in the brain. And here's the key. If I were to just teach skills in a vacuum on a regular basis to my athletes, they would learn it and they would retain it for a short period of time. But if I want my athletes to retain it long-term and apply it meaningfully in the game, I've got to architect the brain with that imagery and those connections and analogies, because that's where it really grooves into the neurons and neural pathways. I know this because I've learned how to tie a knot a million times, but every time it comes time to tie a knot, I have to learn again because it's not grooved. I'm not doing it regularly. I'm not applying it in context. My brain wasn't architected for it. So be architects of the brain. So let's get into Nick Winkelman's 3D cueing. I love the way he creates cueing for us, and I'll really walk it through it. This again is breaking it down into single skills, but it's valuable when you're doing skill-based learning, and you'll see how it connects to our language. Nick believes that we can cue via 3D. And what he talks about is when you give a visual cue or verbal cue to somebody, you want to use direction. So it's toward or away. When I was learning how to cross over from one side of the boat to the other, I was told to put my pinky toe towards the other side and then step across, and obviously passing behind. What that got me into the mindset of was I was moving my body toward the other side of the boat. I was pushing that pinky toe towards the other side of the boat. So it's got to be that toward or away. We would tell base runners when they were stealing second base that we wanted to drive that front leg towards second base. That's another way to do it. So it's always toward. When I was learning to lift, I was told to, when I was doing squats, I was told to drive my shoulders or drive the weight up to the ceiling. Distance, you can use near or far. So again, toward, I could be saying you want to go toward the water, or you want to go towards the side of the boat, towards something, put your foot towards it. So sprinters, we always told them to run to the far wall. Even though the finish line was before the far wall, we were running to the wall. Or you're going to, like, again, shove your hands to the ceiling because it's something that's far away. I could just say, shove your hands, if there's a light thing above me, shove your hands to the light. That's a little bit less. And then finally, he says description. Make it personal, make it memorable, make it powerful. Again, describe something for them. He would tell base runners, for instance, I want you to take off and I want you to drive your legs towards second base like a cheetah is behind you chasing you. That's a memorable description. It's a powerful description, but then you could also make it personal. Think of something that matters to them, something they do on a regular basis, and then connect the dots for them. We used to talk to our kids when they were scooping soccer balls that, drive your toe under, get your leg under, lift your knee, do all the technical stuff. They don't get it, but they all love ice cream. Do you like ice cream? I love ice cream, coach. Okay, so your foot is the spoon and we're going to scoop under that ice cream and pop it right up into our mouths. They got that. And again, scoop under or scoop down and then bring it up. They make up to my mouth maybe. And so now I'm popping the ball up. So make it personal, memorable, and powerful. That's the 3D method. Let me talk a little bit why Nick Winkelman says, and a lot of us say that external cues are better. An internal cue would be to say, drive your shoulder or turn your hip or push your hand over. And those are great. Those are fine, but they're within their body. It's something inside of them. And the difference is that when you use an external cue, you're allowing the brain to self-organize. When you tell them to drive their feet towards something, or when you tell them to reach out towards the far wall, their brain is self-organizing a skill set because you've moved it external of them. Internal, it's really move your arm. But external, now it's self-organizing all of the pieces of the puzzle that need to be used. It creates automaticity and reflexivity. When you use external cues, research has shown, and if you look up Nick Winkelman's work, you'll see there is tons of research around this. It creates automaticity and reflexivity. External cues actually help create that natural flow state in the brain, and certain skills just become reflexive. We just now know. One of the other things I was told when I was learning to squat was to try to create a crack in the floor below me, and because it was an external cue and it was very vivid, I automatically now, anytime I do squats, I automatically put that pressure into the feet and really ground into those heels of the feet, trying to pull that floor apart. It frees up the brain, as I mentioned earlier. When you do an external cue, the brain's not having to think about what's happening inside the body. If you ask somebody, how did you do that? What motions were you doing? We break flow. But if you just are starting to tell people about external cues, you're not asking them about what's going on inside their body, but you're giving them a cue outside their body, their brain is freed up from having to think about everything that's happening in there. And it sort of allows those processes to be focused on other things. Like I said, the analytical nature of the sport. It increases speed, force, accuracy, and duration. Research has shown when you put the cue outside of somebody, they will move faster, stronger, and longer towards that object, and they're more accurate. If you tell somebody to throw that ball right at the hole in the fence, that creates a greater accuracy than I want you to throw the ball as fast as you can. I want you to drive your hand right through the hole in the fence. That driving that hand through the hole in the fence is going to create faster ball. It's going to create more force towards that fence, and it's going to be much more accurate. Higher conservation of resources. Again, as we start to move cues externally, the brain isn't working as hard. The body stops actually overworking, and they're able to conserve resources physically and emotionally in the space. And finally, there's better retention and carryover. Again, if I want my athletes to remember something, I'm going to external cue it so that it's something that stays longer and it carries over to other skills. This is the beauty of skill-based learning. As I teach skills using external cueing and using the right language, it will cross over and create new skills. There's this learning to learn mentality that's happening in phys ed and classrooms in sport, where they say that athletes who learn the proper way to learn then pick it up and it can apply it across new skills. They can apply it across body to a new. So if I'm learning something with my right hand with external cueing, it's much easier for it to transfer to my left, and it's much easier to transfer to other sports and other activities. That's why the external cueing is so vital. So there you have it. It's not just the skills you teach, but the words you use that leave a lasting and deeper impact on your players. Your words are your legacy. And if we're teaching these skills and using intentional language with them and really digging into how we say things, why we say things, when we say things, and what we say, and using that 3D model that Nick Winkelman talks about, you will notice that your athletes will pick up those skills so much faster, apply them in much better conditions, and more importantly, you're creating life skills for them. You're creating the ability to learn and to apply skills they learn and build upon them in any situation in life. I am happy to take questions now. Brittany, do we have any? And there's my contact information.
We do, yes. So we have a couple questions coming in from the comments, and I'll go ahead and read those here. And then if while we're asking some of these, you guys have additional questions and comments that you'd like to share with Reed, feel free to keep firing those away in the live chat and we'll make sure that they get talked about. So first, we have a question coming from Jake, who is a U.S. Sailing employee and also is a Little League coach for his daughter's softball team. And he wants to know, do you find that observing parents prefer more games and free play or specific sport-based instruction? And then how do you balance those two approaches?
Jake, that's a great question, because I saw this a lot and I still see it to this day. The big thing I would see is if coaches didn't coach enough, parents would complain. And I want my money back because all he does is sit on the bench during the game. It's like, wait. So when it comes to training, it's the same thing. We're conditioned as parents to see a lot of activity and a lot of talking as being how kids learn sport. That's what we're conditioned to learn. So the best thing you can do is actually be very communicative from the very beginning. And so in your opening meeting or any emails or communications, and I would communicate regularly with parents if you can, explain to them, this is how we're learning and this is why. The experts talk about this. So what you'll see from me is there will be times where they will be playing games. And it looks like, I used to always say this to my parents, I'd wander over to my parents during practice and I'd stand there and go, see how they're playing a game? I got them fooled. They think they're having fun. I've got them learning. And that way the parents knew what I was doing. If you're not telling the parents why you're doing what you're doing, which I assume you are already, they'll start to ask questions and they'll fill in the blanks themselves. It's just natural for us to fill in those blanks, and we'll start assuming things. So be communicative with them and explain to them, talk to them about the idea behind skill-based learning. And hey, this is the key. I want them to play because it's the only way they can apply these skills in context, which is when they'll get to a game and they'll be very comfortable with it. And all the world's greatest teams play because they know how important it is to drive that context of learning skills in a tactical situation that actually applies to the greater game. I hope that helps.
All right, awesome. Next up, we have a question from Eric, and he wants to know, we introduce and train new sailors at our very casual Wednesday night racing. We teach while we play. Good idea, bad idea? Any advice on how to make it work better for us?
I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching while playing, as long as they're also getting tons of opportunities to play on their own, or at least play in microcosms of the greater sailing experience. I know that for me, I love watching experts do things, and that's how I learned. Obviously, when they took me out sailing in Miami, I was very reluctant to take the helm. I was like, no, you're good. You keep showing me, because I was learning as I was going. But having said that, they will learn the most once you give them the chance to actually try the skills themselves. And you maybe could break it down. You say, okay, we're going to play for a little bit, and we're going to show you some really cool things, and we want you to try them, and then we'll show them again, and then we want you to try them again, and then we'll do them together. But there is a model, just so you know, that is, I teach, you observe, or I do, you observe. You do some, I observe with support. You do all, I observe, and then you're on your own. So you're living in that model when you do the I do, observe.
All right, super. And then we have one more question, unless we see more come in during this answer. And this is from me as a former coach. I'm curious, in sailing, we have a lot of jargon that can be hard for novices to grasp. And so when we're trying to instruct with external cues, do you have any cheats or tips for balancing the effort of doing that while still driving home the new vocabulary that we're really trying to get them to use?
Maybe by accident, because I did the same thing. I would get out there in front of my kids and I'd start talking about outside the foot and this and cut this and over your shoulder. And they'd be like, huh? 6 years old. What's that? And so I started to think about, how does a 6-year-old think? They don't think about the outside of their foot. They think about their pinky toe. And so you start to find those analogies that fit their world, and it helps you sort of put it in their jargon. But you do want them to learn the jargon, especially in sailing, because it's vital. So a lot of times what you do is you can layer it in there. They hear it repeatedly and it becomes that habitual thing. So, for instance, I might say, use your pinky toe. That's our outside of our foot. Use your pinky toe. Use your pinky toe. Remember, your pinky toe is the outside of your foot. And I'm layering in their outside of the foot every once in a while, attaching it to pinky toe, because I'm taking something they know and I'm adding a new concept or new phrase to it, and hoping that it catches at some point where one of them says, oh, that's the outside of my foot. So think about it that way, is how can I attach the jargon to a language or a word or a phrase that they understand at their age, and then slowly remove that phrase that they understand so that the jargon remains.
Great, thanks. And then we have one more from Mike, and he wants to know how you think virtual reality will play into visualizing as part of learning.
I love it. I actually took a look at the virtual reality here in San Diego at the Sailing Leadership Forum, and I absolutely love it, because it's so very realistic, but it's also allowing us to build that visual image. I think there's something about, I noticed this when I played video games a lot, and doing virtual reality. There's something about the neural connection there, where when you actually do the virtual reality, it's building a great image in your brain already, versus just being told how to do something and shown how to do something. And so I think it's going to be a huge leap for us in online learning for sailors, to be able to create greater visualization through virtual reality. And research is out there. It's been proven that there's muscle innervation, that there's learning adaptation. As I mentioned, Jean-Claude Keely, he had his greatest race ever coming off of a 2-week stint where he had hurt himself and couldn't train. So they went out and recorded the course, and I think it was Chamonix, and did visualization for 2 weeks. And then he went and ran the course, having never run it physically, but only in his brain, and had his greatest race ever. So it's proven to work. And I think AR will really help connect that, because it's taking the visualization and actually making it far more real.
Very cool. And Jake again wants to know what your thoughts are on giving homework assignments in the form of short practice so that they think about what they've learned in practice and can apply it afterwards.
We loved homework assignments, but we always, you have to make it fun. So we with soccer, and you're kind of in the same boat, because when I was coaching much younger, it was really hard to find soccer on TV and those opportunities. But we would, if there was a women's national team game or something like that, we would send the kids home and we'd say, hey, here's your homework. I want you to see how many times, and they'd have to count the number of times the center midfielder looked over her shoulder during the game or something like that, so they could see the skills we were talking about being used in context. And then we'd ask them to report back. And really, we didn't care about the number count, because then we'd ask them, well, what did you notice when they checked their shoulder that much? How important do you think it is to your game? And when you give them homework assignments that allow them to watch others or emulate pros, etc., there's that sort of that admiration that's there, that they want to be just like the pros, but just showing them good habits. For skills like knot tying and stuff, I think it's great. You could have them do races, like how many knots can you tie before next Friday, or how fast can you tie a such and such knot, and we'll check in at our next practice. And if you make it fun for them, then it's not homework, it's just getting to play when they're not on the dock.
All right, I think that is all the questions we have. Thank you so much for being here, Reed. For members in the audience, if you haven't seen already, his contact info is on the screen right here. So if you want to follow up and ask him more questions, feel free to hit him up at, what is that, your Twitter handle there?
It is, and I was going to say, please email me. It's Reed, spelled the same way, REED, @coachreed.com. And I forgot to put it on there. I'm happy to answer emails and help you out. I left tons of time here at the end for questions, so I'm happy to stick around for a minute or two. Or if you want to ask it via email, please ask it via email. I'm here to help you again. And I know I'm total neophyte to sailing, so I'll try to connect it to your experience. But I think that's what makes it cool, is I know nothing about sailing, but we can figure this coaching thing out together.
Fantastic. We have a lot of thank yous coming in from the comments. So I just want to echo that and say thanks again for joining us on our premiere session on the Starboard portal. For everybody watching, we'll be having a session each day, so tune into that to see the next sessions that are coming up tomorrow. And thanks again, Reed.
Thank you. Love my sailing family.